The bus door hissed open, releasing a blast of humid South Carolina air into the cabin. Emily Carter stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of Paris Island, her boots thudding in rhythm with her pounding heart. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, the first step into the United States Marine Corps. It didn't feel like she'd imagined. The air reeked of diesel and salt water. Drill instructors barked orders at a line of wide-eyed recruits. The shouts were so sharp, they seemed to slice through the damp morning fog. Emily's eyes darted to the others stepping off the bus, most of them taller, broader, and radiating the kind of confidence she didn't feel yet. The whispers started almost immediately. "She's too small. Bet she's gone in a week. Marines ain't for girls like that." Emily didn't flinch. She'd grown up in a small Kansas town where people assumed they knew your limits before you even tried. But those limits had never sat well with her. She had been a farm girl who could lift hay bales as easily as most kids lifted grocery bags. A girl who ran 3 miles to school because she hated the bus. A girl who had once climbed the town's old water tower just to prove a dare wrong. She hadn't joined the Marines to be comfortable. She'd joined to prove to herself and everyone else that she could do what most wouldn't even attempt. Still, as they were herded into formation, the reality of her choice began to press in. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Lewis, a barrel-chested man with a voice like thunder, strode past the line. His eyes scanned each recruit like he was weighing them for battle. When his gaze landed on Emily, it lingered just long enough to make her stomach knot. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Within the first hour, the pace broke her expectations. There were no easing in periods, no getting to know you introductions. Orders came rapid fire. Drop your bags, line up, memorize the recruit creed, learn the layout of the barracks. When she hesitated for even a second, Lewis's shadow loomed over her. "Carter, are we moving in Marine time or Kansas time?" He barked. She snapped to attention. "Marine time, sir." "That's what I thought," he said, but his smirk told her he didn't think she meant it. The first day blurred into the first week. Every morning began before the sun, with the blare of a whistle that made her heart leap into her throat. Physical training was relentless push-ups until her arms gave out, runs until her legs felt like lead, drills until her hands were raw from gripping cold steel. She learned the smell of sweat and gun oil like it was part of her own skin. And still, the whispers followed her. "She can't keep up. She wash out. Why's she even here?" Some didn't bother whispering. During a forced march, one corporal, tall, lean, and with a cruel smile, fell back to walk beside her. His eyes raked over her frame like he was measuring her for a coffin. "Your baggage, Carter," he said. "Dead weight. We carry you. Or you slow us down. Either way, you're not making it to graduation." Emily bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. She didn't respond, because that was what he wanted, a reaction, a crack in her armor. She refused to give it to him. In the barracks that night, she lay in the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling. The air was thick with the sound of snoring and the faint rustle of fabric as recruits shifted in their sleep. She couldn't sleep. The corporal's words looped in her mind, tangled up with her own doubts. She thought of home, her father's calloused hands as he worked on the tractor, her mother's tired smile after long shifts at the diner, the dusty horizon of Kansas fields stretching endlessly in every direction. Nobody there had believed she'd actually go through with this. Some had laughed outright. Maybe they were right. The thought made her clench her fists so tightly, her knuckles popped. No, she had come here for a reason. If she left, she'd be proving them all right. The boys in her high school who'd said she was just a farm girl. The recruiters who'd hesitated before sliding the contract across the table. The women who told her the Marines were a man's world. A few bunks away, a recruit named Mason stirred. "You awake?" he whispered. Emily didn't answer at first. She wasn't in the mood for conversation. But Mason's tone wasn't mocking. It was low, tired, maybe even sympathetic. "You'll get used to it," he said. "They're just testing you. They'll keep pushing until you break, but if you don't, you'll be one of them." She let the words hang in the dark. When the next morning came, the cycle repeated physical drills, weapons handling, combat formations. On the third day, she overheard two instructors talking as she jogged past the training yard. "Carter?" "She won't last a month," one said. "2 weeks, tops," the other replied. Something in her chest went cold, and then hot. They weren't just testing her, they were betting against her. That night, instead of lying awake in frustration, she lay awake making a decision. The upcoming schedule posted outside the barracks had caught her eye earlier. Hand to hand. Combat simulation. All recruits participate. She'd seen who they'd be facing. Gunnery Sergeant Blake. Even the cockiest recruits talked about him like a living nightmare. Nobody had beaten him. Nobody had even lasted more than a minute. It should have terrified her. Instead, it focused her. She pictured Blake's smirk, the way he looked at recruits like they were problems to be solved, and her as one already solved, filed under not worth my time. She imagined stepping into that ring and refusing to be predictable, refusing to be weak. If they wanted her to break, they were going to have to work a lot harder. When she finally closed her eyes, there was no fear left, just a slow, steady fire in her chest. The Marines thought they knew Emily Carter. They were about to find out they didn't know her at all. The days at Paris Island didn't pass. They bled together in one endless cycle of sweat, grit, and pain. Emily Carter woke each morning before the sun, the barracks lit only by the sickly yellow glow of the overhead lamps. The whistle's shrill cry ripped her from sleep, and within seconds, she was out of her cot, boots laced, standing at attention, like a statue carved out of sheer will. But no matter how fast she moved, it was never fast enough. Staff Sergeant Lewis seemed to have radar for her mistakes, the half-second hesitation before responding to an order, the extra breath she took after a sprint, the split-second delay in locking her rifle bolt. "You move like you're strolling through a wheat field, Carter," he barked one morning during a timed drill. "Pick it up. This isn't Sunday in Kansas." Her face burned as the rest of the squad snickered. She ignored them, locking her eyes forward. Physical training was relentless. Runs under the punishing South Carolina sun left salt streaks on her cheeks where sweat dried too quickly. Push-ups went on until her arms trembled and buckled beneath her. Obstacle courses became a battlefield between her mind and body, each. Rope climb and wall vault another chance to fail in front of the others. Her hands, once soft despite farm work, were now rough, calloused, and blistered from hours of weapon handling. The M16's cold metal seemed to bite into her palms, and every cleaning drill felt like a test designed to expose her shortcomings. It wasn't just the physical grind that weighed on her. A mental game was worse. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd sharpened. "She's slowing us down. She's not going to make it. Why is she even here? She's just making it harder for the rest of us." Some of it was said right to her face. On the fourth week, during a grueling 10-mile march with full packs, a corporal named Hastings dropped back from the front to walk beside her. His expression was all mock concern. "You good back there, Carter?" he asked, voice pitched just loud enough for others to hear. "You're not gonna pass out on us, are you?" "I'm fine," she said flatly, eyes forward. He leaned in slightly. "You know, you don't have to prove anything. You can just go home. Let the real Marines do the work." She didn't answer. She didn't trust herself to speak without snapping, and snapping was exactly what they wanted, a sign of weakness, proof she couldn't hack it. Instead, she kept her breathing steady and pushed through the pain in her calves. Each step was an act of defiance. That night in the barracks, she lay awake, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the other recruits. Her legs ached, her shoulders felt like someone had poured molten lead into them, and her hands throbbed with every heartbeat. But the pain wasn't what kept her awake. It was the doubt. For the first time since arriving, she asked herself the question she'd been avoiding. What if they're right? She thought of the instructor's clipped conversations she'd overheard earlier that day outside the training yard. Carter, she won't last the month, one had said. 2 weeks. Tops, the other replied. She hadn't even been meant to hear it, but she had. And once she heard it, she couldn't unhear it. Lying there, she felt the sting of it in her chest. They weren't just skeptical. They were certain she would fail. But along with the sting came something else, something sharper. If they thought she would fail, then proving them wrong would be all the sweeter. The turning point came when word spread through the barracks about the upcoming combat simulation, the first full-contact hand-to-hand test against the instructors. Each recruit would face Gunnery Sergeant Blake, the close combat trainer whose reputation was practically a campfire horror story. Nobody had ever beaten him. Nobody had even come close. Recruits whispered about how fast he was, how he could strip a weapon from your hands before you even knew he'd moved. He was a wall of muscle with reflexes like a striking snake. If you got lucky, you'd last 30 seconds. Most didn't last 10. Emily listened to the chatter without joining in. Blake's gonna fold her like laundry, one recruit said. With a smirk. She'll probably cry before he even touches her, another replied. She kept her face blank, but inside, something was shifting. The idea of going up against Blake should have filled her with dread. Instead, it focused her in a way nothing else had. She realized that this was the moment she'd been waiting for. It was her chance to take all the doubt, all the insults, all the quiet bets against her, and shove them right back in their faces. From that night forward, her routine changed. She still endured the official training during the day, but when lights went out, she didn't rest. She slipped quietly from her bunk and made her way to the shadowed corners of the training yard. There, she began working alone, or so she thought, until one evening a voice cut through the dark. You're either crazy or serious, the voice said. She turned to see Sergeant Torres, an older Marine with weathered skin and eyes that missed nothing. Bit of both, Emily replied. Torres studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's see what you've got. From that night on, Torres drilled her in close-quarters combat. Wrist locks, grip breaks, leverage points. Disarm techniques. He moved slow at first, letting her understand each movement before increasing the speed. Every time she faltered, he made her repeat the sequence until her muscles ached with memory. And all the while, she thought of Blake. She watched him during the day whenever she could, analyzing his patterns. He always led with his right, often used a shoulder feint before going for a takedown, and occasionally dropped his guard when overcommitting to a strike. Small things, but things she could use. The more she trained at night, the less the whispers during the day bothered her. Hastings could smirk. The instructors could bet against her. None of it mattered. Because Emily Carter had a plan. And when the day of the simulation came, she wouldn't just survive it. She'd make damn sure they never forgot it. If Paris Island had a ghost story, it walked on 2 legs and wore a crimson campaign cover. Gunnery Sergeant Blake didn't just teach close-quarters combat. He owned it. He was built like the Marine Corps had commissioned him from stone. Broad shoulders, a neck thick as a tree trunk, arms that looked like they could bend steel. His eyes were a hard, unreadable gray, the kind of eyes that made recruits stand straighter without realizing it. Every class he ran was an exercise in fear. Not because he shouted, although he could, but because of the way he moved. Smooth, fast, and precise. He didn't waste energy, didn't telegraph his strikes, didn't give opponents the satisfaction of thinking they had a chance. Emily first saw him in action during a midweek demonstration. The recruits had been lined up. Along the edges of the combat mat, knees pressed into the cold, unforgiving floor. Blake stood in the center, holding a training rifle with a rubber bayonet attached. "Listen up," he said, voice carrying easily without shouting. "In close quarters, hesitation gets you killed. So I'm going to show you what happens when you hesitate." He motioned for the first volunteer. Private Martinez, a big guy who'd spent his pre-Marine days as a high school linebacker, stepped forward. He looked nervous but determined. The whistle blew and Martinez charged. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Blake sidestepped, hooked the rifle out of Martinez's hands, and swept his legs in one fluid motion. Martinez hit the mat with a thud that echoed. The room went silent. "Next," Blake said. The second recruit didn't fare any better, nor did the third. Blake dropped each one faster than the last, barely breaking a sweat. When it was over, he looked around at the circle of recruits. His eyes lingered on Emily for a fraction of a second longer than most. It wasn't a glare. It was worse. It was dismissal. Later, during inspection lineup, he stopped in front of her. The afternoon sun caught the brim of his cover, casting a sharp shadow over his face. "Carter," he said, his tone flat but edged with amusement. "Sir?" she replied, her voice steady. He looked her up and down. "Don't worry," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "I'll go easy on you." He didn't wait for her response. He stepped past her, leaving the faint smell of gun oil and something metallic in the air. Emily didn't move. She kept her eyes locked straight ahead, but inside, her stomach knotted. Not from fear, from anger. She knew that tone, the same. One she'd heard from high school coaches who'd assumed she couldn't keep up with the boys. From the local recruiters who'd raised an eyebrow when she'd said, "Marines." It was the tone of someone who had already decided what she was capable of. That night, she replayed the demonstration in her mind. Every movement Blake had made, every opening he'd created and closed in the same breath. He fought like water, flowing where you weren't ready, hitting where you weren't looking. It was terrifying, and it was exactly what she needed to learn to beat. She started watching his training sessions whenever she could. When her squad's PT took place on the far side of the yard, she'd angle herself toward the hand-to-hand pit just to catch glimpses of him. She noticed things most wouldn't. The way he always led with his right, the subtle shift in his shoulders before he lunged, the half-second where his stance widened during a takedown. Patterns, small ones, but patterns nonetheless. Torres noticed her watching. "You're studying him," he said one night after their extra drills. Emily didn't look up from the wooden rifle she was disassembling. "I'm learning him." Torres grinned faintly. "That's good. Most people don't see past the intimidation. But remember, he's not unbeatable. Nobody is." She raised an eyebrow. "You ever beat him?" The grin faded. "No, but I've seen someone come close." The way Torres said it made her want to know more, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he tossed her the rifle parts. Again. Over the next days, the atmosphere in the barracks shifted. The upcoming combat simulation had become the only thing recruits talked about. Most were dreading it. Some treated it like an unavoidable execution date. Others bragged about how they'd at least make Blake work for it. The bravado didn't. Last, on the day before the simulation, Blake decided to run warm-up spars. 5 volunteers stepped forward. Each walked in confident, Each walked out bruised and humiliated. By the time the last recruit limped off the mat, the room was silent. Blake turned to face the rest of them. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll get your turn. And if you think you can beat me, good. Try." His gaze found Emily again. This time, there was no smirk. Just a steady, unreadable look before he turned away. That night, Emily didn't sleep much. She lay in her bunk, running through scenarios. In her head, she knew she couldn't overpower Blake. She wasn't faster in a sprint, and she wasn't stronger. Her advantage was surprise, doing the one thing he wouldn't expect from her. Torres's voice echoed in her mind. Nobody's unbeatable. She clung to that. When morning came, the air felt thicker, heavier. Breakfast was quiet. Even the most talkative recruits seemed lost in thought. By the time they marched to the combat hall, Emily's pulse was steady. Not calm, exactly, but sharp, like the edge of a blade. The hall was already buzzing when they arrived. Recruits lined the walls. Instructors stood with arms crossed. A mat in the center looked impossibly small, and there, at the far end, stood Gunnery Sergeant Blake, waiting. The sun was barely cresting over the camp when the whistle split the air like a whip. The Marines were already lined up, boots stomping in unison, their breaths making small clouds in the cold morning air. Evelyn stood among them, her uniform crisp, her hands steady, but her heart hammering with anticipation. Today wasn't just another drill, it was the gauntlet, a brutal day-long sequence of tests designed to break even the strongest recruits. SGT Miller strode to the front, his voice booming. "Today, you'll find out who deserves the title of Marine and who's just playing dress-up." His eyes lingered on Evelyn for a second longer than on anyone else, and she caught the faintest smirk. The message was clear. He still doubted her. The first stage was the obstacle course ropes, walls, mud pits, and razor wire. The men dashed forward like wolves released from a cage. Evelyn took off too, her movements deliberate. She vaulted over the first wall with ease, but the second taller, slick with morning dew, was a different beast. A few recruits already had their hands over the top, pulling themselves up. Evelyn took 2 steps back, ran hard, and leapt, fingers just catching the edge. Her muscles burned as she hauled herself up and over, landing in the mud with a splash. "Move it, Walker," Miller barked. She didn't answer, didn't waste breath, she just kept going. The rope climb was next. Marines ahead of her scrambled like monkeys up the line, but halfway up, one man froze, arms trembling. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Move your right foot." "To the knot," she shouted. The man found his footing, and she passed him, ringing the bell at the top. When she hit the ground again, mud clung to her like armor. By the halfway point, her muscles screamed, and her palms were raw. But the next phase made everything else look like child's play combat drills in the pit. Pairs were called in to spar, using padded sticks and sheer grit. Evelyn was matched with Corporal Henderson, a towering man with shoulders like steel beams. The match started with a sharp crack of sticks. Henderson swung with the force of a batter at home plate. But Evelyn ducked, sidestepped, and jabbed twice to his ribs. He grunted, retaliated, and sent her stumbling backward into the mud. The onlookers jeered, but Evelyn recovered instantly, spinning low and sweeping his legs. He hit the ground with a thud, stick falling from his hand. The whistle blew. "Point Walker," the referee called. That earned a few raised eyebrows in the crowd. After lunch, if you could call a protein bar, and a gulp of water lunch, they moved to the endurance test, a 5-mile run with full gear. The pack bit into her shoulders, and the rifle's weight seemed to grow with every step. Evelyn kept a steady rhythm, passing 1, then 2, then 5 recruits who had started too fast. The finish line loomed ahead, marked by two grim-faced instructors. She crossed with her lungs burning, but she refused to bend over or show weakness. When they finally reached the last stage hand-to-hand combat with the instructors, everyone was running on fumes. Most recruits lost their matches within seconds, tossed into the dirt by seasoned Marines. Evelyn's turn came, and SGT, Miller himself, stepped forward. He removed his hat and squared up. "Let's see what you've got, Walker." They circled each other, the air between them tense. Miller lunged first, aiming for her torso, but she pivoted sharply, grabbing his arm and twisting just enough to unbalance him. He recovered, fainting low before going high with a strike. Evelyn blocked with her forearm, the sting radiating up to her shoulder. The crowd was alive now, shouts echoing around them. She waited for her moment, remembering every drill, every lesson. When he overextended with a right hook, she stepped inside his guard, hooked his wrist, and twisted. In a flash, she had him on one knee, his own arm locked painfully behind him. The whistle blew. A ripple went through the recruits. Miller stood, rubbing his shoulder but smiling faintly. "Not bad, Walker. Not bad at all." Evelyn didn't smile back. She just nodded, standing tall despite the aches tearing through her body. This was only one battle in a longer war to prove herself, but for the first time, she sensed the tide might be turning. That night, when the barracks lights went out, the whispers started. "Did you see her take Miller down? She's tougher than she looks." And somewhere in the dark, Evelyn allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Because tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The dawn broke over the Marine Corps' base in a haze of golden light, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Sergeant Holloway stood at the far end, arms folded, watching the recruits assemble. His eyes scanned the group until they found Elena, standing tall at the back, her hair tied neatly, her gaze calm but unflinching. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day of the close combat evaluation. And in the Marine Corps, that test wasn't just about skill. It was about proving you belonged. Elena had heard the whispers all week. No way she passes. She's strong, but hand-to-hand, not happening. They spoke as though she were invisible, but she caught every word. It didn't anger her, it fueled her. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, moments where doubt became her greatest motivator. The recruits lined up in 2 rows facing the sparring mat. In the center stood Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves, a mountain of a man with decades of combat experience. He was the legend of the base, known for his no-mercy training style. No recruit had ever disarmed him in a simulated knife drill, not once in 15 years. The rule was simple: survive 3 minutes against Reeves with a rubber training knife, or get taken down. Holloway stepped forward. "All right, you know the rules. Reeves goes first. Any volunteer?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Silence. No one wanted to be the first to face the man who'd put seasoned corporals flat on their backs. Then, without hesitation, Elena stepped forward. Her boots struck the mat with a soft thud. Gasps rippled through the recruits. Reeves raised an eyebrow, his deep voice rumbling. "You sure, Private Torres? You could wait your turn." She shook her head. "I'm ready, sir." The knife gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the hangar doors. Reeves moved with deliberate slowness, circling her like a predator testing his prey. The whistle blew. He lunged. The first strike came faster than she expected, but Elena dropped low, sidestepping with a pivot that put her at his flank. She didn't counter, she simply observed. Reeves smirked. "Not bad." His left hand shot out, grabbing her shoulder, trying to pull her into a knee strike. Elena rolled backward, springing to her feet in one fluid motion. The recruits watching began murmuring. No one lasted more than 10 seconds without taking a hit. Reeves pressed harder, his knife slashing in a blur of arcs and feints. Elena deflected with open palms, using every ounce of her agility to avoid getting cornered. She remembered her father's words from years ago. Don't try to overpower them, outthink them. She began reading his rhythm. 2 jabs, 1 feint, a low slash. Again. 2 jabs, 1 feint, a low slash. On the 4th repetition, she moved. Reeves feinted low. Elena stepped into the motion instead of away from it, twisting her torso and trapping his wrist under her forearm. The sudden reversal made his grip falter for just a fraction of a second, but that was all she needed. Her right hand shot up, gripping his wrist. Her left hand clamped his elbow. She pivoted, pulling him forward with his own momentum. The knife slipped from his hand and clattered onto the mat. Gasps erupted from the recruits. Holloway's eyes widened. Reeves froze for a moment, then looked down at his empty hand. Slowly, a smile spread across his weathered face. "Well," he said, stepping back, "that's a first." The whistle blew. 3 minutes hadn't even passed. Elena released his arm and stepped back, her breathing steady, her eyes locked on him in silent respect. Reeves bent down, picked up the knife, and handed it to her. "You didn't win because you were stronger," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire platoon to hear. "You won because you paid attention." She nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a test of combat, it was a test of patience, observation, and willpower. The rest of the drills went on, but the energy had shifted. Every recruit who stepped onto the mat after her carried the memory of what they'd just witnessed. For the first time, whispers about Elena weren't about doubt, they were about awe. When training ended, Reeves caught up to her near the lockers. "Torres," he called. She turned. "You've got a knack for this. Don't waste it." Elena gave a small smile. "Wasn't planning to, sir." As she walked away, the echoes of the fight still lingered in her mind. She knew more challenges were coming, harder ones, with higher stakes. But now she also knew this. They could underestimate her all they wanted. It only made her victories sharper, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire burned brighter than ever. The humid air of Camp Pendleton's training field felt heavy that morning, pressing down on every Marine present. The recruits stood in formation, boots planted firmly in the sandy soil, the rhythmic clack of rifles being adjusted echoing faintly. Word had spread quickly about Elena's last sparring match, the one where she'd sent Corporal Ray to the mat in less than a minute. Some said it was a fluke. Others whispered that she was a natural. But for Elena, it was just another step in a much longer climb. Gunnery Sergeant Hawthorne, the man in charge of combat readiness drills, had been skeptical of her since day one. He was a thick-shouldered, square-jawed veteran with a permanent scowl, the kind that had seen too many fresh recruits wash out and didn't waste time sugarcoating reality. Hawthorne didn't care for rumors, but he did care about proving a Chauvelin point, and today he had one to make. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hawthorne barked, voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Today, we're doing an unscheduled combat drill. No warm-ups, no warnings. You fight as if it's your last day on Earth, because if you don't, it will be." Elena felt the ripple of nervous energy pass through the ranks. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to keep breathing evenly. She'd been through worse, maybe. But something in Hawthorne's tone made her think this wasn't just another exercise. The first few matches were predictable. Bigger, stronger recruits dominating smaller ones. Speed beating brute force, only when the smaller fighter had the nerve to push past fear. Then Hawthorne called her name. Garcia, front and center. She stepped forward, boots crunching. On the gravel, helmet under her arm. Hawthorne didn't give her time to prepare. He pointed toward a man she didn't recognize, at least not from her training group. This Marine was older, maybe late 30s, with a calm, unsettling gaze. His stance was relaxed, but his presence radiated quiet danger. "This is Staff Sergeant Brooks," Hawthorne said. "Marine Force Recon. Combat deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and God knows where else. He's here to show you all what real fighting looks like." Hawthorne's eyes flicked to Elena with something close to a smirk. "Garcia, you're up first." Brooks didn't smile. He simply gave a short nod, stepped into the ring, and loosened his shoulders. Elena tightened her gloves, feeling every muscle in her body coil. She wasn't sure if Hawthorne was testing her skill or setting her up to fail in front of everyone. The whistle blew. Brooks moved first, faster than she expected for someone his size. She barely sidestepped the first strike, feeling the rush of air as his arm cut past her cheek. She pivoted, keeping her weight low, eyes locked on his chest rather than his hands. It was a trick her uncle had taught her years ago. The chest never lies. They circled, sand kicking up underfoot. Brooks launched a low kick. She blocked. He countered with a strike to her ribs, and she absorbed it, gritting her teeth against the sting. He wasn't going easy on her. This was full force. The onlookers had gone silent. Every grunt, every footstep seemed louder in the stillness. Brooks pressed harder, his movements like water flowing around her defenses. A quick feint had her leaning the wrong way. His arm shot up toward her collar, aiming for a grapple. Instinct screamed at her to duck, but training whispered otherwise. She stepped into his motion, locking his arm under hers, and twisted sharply. He let out a short, surprised grunt as she disrupted his balance. But Brooks wasn't finished. He shifted his weight, reversing her leverage, and they both went to the ground in a controlled fall. Sand filled her vision, her helmet skittering away. She felt his arm press against her shoulder in a textbook choke position. For a split second, the world slowed. She remembered the long nights practicing counters in the dim light of the barracks, her hands raw from repetition. She remembered the feeling of being underestimated, mocked, told she didn't belong. And something inside her refused to accept that this moment would end in defeat. Her hand shot up, gripping his sleeve near the elbow. She shifted her hips, using the small space he'd left unguarded. Her legs hooked around his torso, and she rolled hard, forcing his weight off her throat. In the same motion, she trapped his wrist and twisted. Brooks's hand opened, a reflexive release to protect. The joint. Hawthorne's whistle cut through the air. The fight was over. The silence hung for a moment before the murmurs started. A few recruits looked at her with something like awe. Others seemed almost annoyed she hadn't been crushed. Brooks stood, slowly dusting himself off, a small smirk touching his lips. "You're fast," he said simply, offering her a hand up. "And you don't panic. That's rare." Hawthorne's face was unreadable, but his jaw worked slightly, as if he was grinding out a thought he didn't want to voice. "Not bad, Garcia. We'll see if you can do it again tomorrow." She wanted to collapse. Her lungs burned, her limbs trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She wasn't here to survive one fight. She was here to prove she belonged, fight after fight, no matter who they put in front of her. Later that night, in the quiet of her barracks, she replayed the match in her mind. Every mistake, every moment of hesitation, every tiny opening she could have exploited better. She wasn't celebrating yet. If today had taught her anything, it was that the Corps wasn't looking for one good fight. They were looking for consistency, for the ability to win when the odds and the instructors were against you. And she was ready to give them exactly that. The dawn over Paris Island was colder than usual, its gray light stretching across the parade ground like a warning. Word had spread quickly. Today wasn't going to be an ordinary drill. Captain Rhodes had organized what he called the trial, an advanced combat test rarely given to recruits, let alone to a woman in her position. The purpose was clear: prove herself in front of the entire training company, or fail so decisively that no one would question her removal. Elena stood at the edge of the field, boots planted firmly, her breath forming small clouds in the morning chill. Every eye was on her. Hundreds of recruits, instructors, and even senior officers lined up to watch. She felt their stares, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and anticipation. They weren't here to cheer her on. They were here to witness what many believed would be her downfall. The obstacle course had been transformed into something brutal. Rope climbs slick with water, sand pits deep enough to swallow a man's legs, and weapon drills scattered between physical challenges. But the real test wasn't the obstacles. It was the combat scenarios embedded throughout. And for the final stage, she would face Sergeant Iron Keller, the instructor known for never losing in hand-to-hand training. The whistle blew. Elena launched forward, her body a controlled explosion of movement. The first challenge, the rope climb, was designed to drain her arms early. She attacked it with precision, locking her legs and hauling herself upward, ignoring the burn in her forearms. At the top, she swung over without hesitation, dropping to the next section. The sand pit tried to swallow her steps, each movement sinking into resistance. Other recruits had failed here before they even reached the halfway mark. Elena leaned forward, driving with her legs like pistons, her eyes fixed on the far edge. She emerged coated in grit, her uniform weighed down, but her pace never faltered. The weapon drills were next, a gauntlet of disassembly and reassembly stations. Instructors barked orders as they tossed her unfamiliar rifles, sidearms, and even machine gun components. Her fingers worked from muscle memory, snapping pieces together, checking safety mechanisms, then moving on before the instructors could even smirk. "Keep moving, Vasquez," Rhodes barked from the sidelines. His voice wasn't mocking this time. It was sharp, urgent. Whether it was begrudging respect or just the heat of the moment, Elena didn't know. She didn't care. The third phase was endurance, a weighted sprint with ammo crates. The straps dug into her shoulders, biting into her collarbone. Each step sent shocks through her calves, but she locked her jaw and kept going. She had learned early in life that pain was just a signal, not a stop sign. And then, the final stage loomed. Sergeant Keller stood in the center of the combat ring, a mountain of muscle, scarred hands, and cold eyes. His presence alone carried the weight of every fight he'd won. He rolled his shoulders, smirking as Elena approached. "Vasquez," he said slowly, voice like gravel. "This is where your little run ends." She didn't reply. The Corps had taught her that words before a fight were wasted energy. The bell rang. Keller moved first, closing the distance with the confidence of a man who had ended hundreds of sparring matches in seconds. His jab came fast, faster than most recruits could process. Elena slipped under it, pivoting left. The crowd's collective breath caught. She was already inside his guard. But Keller wasn't just power. He was experience. He spun with her, using his weight to force her back. A sweeping kick nearly took her legs, but she caught herself, planting hard and countering with a palm strike to his ribs. It landed, but his sheer mass absorbed it. The next minute was a blur. Keller pressing forward, Elena deflecting, ducking, weaving. She could hear the shouts of the recruits, the bark of the instructors, the pounding of her own heart. Every block and strike was a calculation. Protect the jaw, guard the ribs, keep moving. And then he made his first mistake. Keller reached for a clinch, overextending just enough. Elana's left hand shot up, locking his wrist. Her right arm threaded under his elbow, and she twisted, not just with her arms, but with her whole body. The torque ripped through the motion, forcing Keller's balance to shift. In one fluid movement, she stripped the training knife from his belt and spun it into her grip. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Keller froze, his arm still locked, the tip of the rubber blade resting just inches from his throat. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in something closer to disbelief. Rhodes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Sergeant Keller, do you yield?" Keller's jaw clenched. For a moment, it looked like pride might push him to fight. "On." But then, slowly, he nodded. "I yield." The crowd broke into chaotic murmurs. Some were shocked, some were impressed. A few still looked unconvinced. But no one could deny what they had seen. Elena Vasquez had disarmed the most feared instructor in the course. She released Keller, stepping back with measured calm. She didn't raise her arms in victory or smile for the crowd. She simply stood there, chest heaving, the knife hanging loosely in her hand until an instructor took it away. Rhodes walked up to her, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, almost imperceptibly, he gave a single nod. The trial was over. But Elena knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. Not just the one she was training for, but the one for respect, equality, and the right to stand as a Marine without an asterisk next to her name. As the crowd began to disperse, she caught sight of a few recruits, both men and women, looking at her differently. Not as a liability, not as an exception, but as a fighter. And that, she thought, was worth more than any victory. Months had passed since Elena Vasquez had disarmed Sergeant Keller in front of the entire training company. The event rippled through the Marine Corps, whispered about in mess halls, and echoed in briefings. But the true test wasn't inside the controlled chaos of Paris Island. It was on the battlefield. Deployment orders arrived suddenly, sending waves of adrenaline and uncertainty through the platoon. Elena was assigned to a unit heading to a forward operating base deep in a volatile region. She packed her gear carefully, each piece a reminder of the grueling training and sacrifices behind her. On arrival, the dusty air was thick with tension and the scent of diesel. Elena's squad operated in a hostile environment where every decision meant life or death. Here, no reputation or titles mattered, only skill, teamwork, and trust. One afternoon, during a routine patrol, Elena's unit was ambushed. The crackle of gunfire shattered the relative calm. The enemy was well coordinated, pushing hard to overwhelm the squad. Chaos erupted. Amid the firefight, Elena spotted movement of figure, advancing with a weapon raised. Her instincts took over. With fluid precision, she engaged in close quarters, recalling every lesson learned under harsh instructors. Her training kicked in as she closed distance, disarming the attacker with a swift maneuver she perfected months earlier. Her squad rallied around her, fighting back fiercely. Elena's actions saved several lives that day, proving beyond doubt that she was no longer just the recruit who had surprised her instructors. She was a Marine in every sense. News of her courage spread quickly through the unit. Fellow Marines, who had once doubted her, now looked to her as an example. The whispered doubts had transformed into quiet respect, and then into open admiration. In the quiet moments after the firefight, Elena stood surveying the horizon, her heart heavy with the price of war, but proud of the woman she'd become. She had fought not only the enemy outside, but the skepticism within, emerging stronger on both fronts. Her journey, from the girl the Corps never believed could fight, to the Marine who disarmed the toughest instructor in front of the entire Corps, to a combat-tested warrior, earning the respect of her brothers and sisters in arms, was complete. Elena knew her fight was far from over. For every barrier broken, another awaited. But now she was ready, battle-hardened, unshakable, and fiercely proud to wear the uniform. Because she had proved one undeniable truth: courage and determination don't care about gender. They belong to those willing to fight for it, no matter the odds.